Lanny McInnes, I'm President and CEO of the Manitoba Home Builders Association, and welcome to our third MHBA virtual technical session for 2022. Thank you all for attending today's webinar. Just some minor housekeeping notes before we begin. Your cameras and your microphones are muted for the consideration of our speakers and for the consideration of other attendees. If you do have questions during today's presentation, please type your questions into the chat box. You can do that by clicking the chat icon at the bottom of the screen. We'll be monitoring the chat for your questions, and there'll be plenty of time for questions, comments, and answers at the end of today's presentation. And so without further ado, let's kick things off. I'll introduce today's speakers. Ihor Barwinsky is the safety manager for Gypsum Drywall Interiors and has been involved in their health and safety programs, both commercial and residential, for 15 years. He holds an NCSO designation and has been a presenter on scaffolding topics at several CSAM seminars. Ihor also worked for several WCB RWIP projects on reducing musculoskeletal injuries. And strangely enough, he finds residential scaffolding problems to be a fun challenge. So Ihor is the chair of the MHBA Safety Committee and is a member of our board of directors. So thank you for being one of our presenters today, Ihor. Our second panelist presenter is Ross Jardine. Ross brings 30 years of experience in the construction industry. And in the last 5 years, Ross has been a member of the CSAM C-Core audit team. In addition to performing audits, Ross has delivered construction safety training courses throughout Manitoba, as well as safety conferences in Winnipeg and Brandon. Ross is a member of the MHBA Workplace Safety and Health Committee, our Renovator Council, the WCA CSAM Safety Committee, and the Manitoba Construction Sector Council Training Development Committee. Recently, Ross joined the client service team at CSAM. The client service team is there for CSAM clients to use for any questions or needs that they have in regards to developing, implementing, and managing their core safety programs, as well as providing support to their clients for their training needs. And here at the MHBA, if you need anything from CSAM, Ross is your guy. So Ihor and Ross, thank you so much for being our speakers today, and I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Lanny. Ross. Welcome, everyone. And we're going to just hop right into scaffold safety specific to the residential sector. So what do we do in a house? What tasks and stages of construction do home builders typically follow? Well, rough ends, electrical, plumbing and heating, insulation, poly and vapor barrier, drywall, taping, prime and paint, finished carpentry, finished painting, service work, and then there's everybody's favorite time of the year, stucco season. What do we do outside? Well, we do pretty much the same. You're often going to need to get way up there for a long time, but with different equipment. The major considerations that you need to be looking at is the base of any scaffold systems and the mud sills on scaffold systems that you are using. One of the things that we often see missing is fall protection. Always fall protection. Your planking. If you are going to be using planking that you are not purchasing, so in other words, you're manufacturing on the site, there are certain things that you need to follow. We'll touch on those a little later on. Is a lift a better way? In some cases, using aerial lifts may save you time and money, but you're going to have to really put your thinking caps on from one project to the other. Another thing that you need to be aware of is your potential MSIs from repetitive setup or takedown, repetitive material up and down, so moving your material from the ground up onto your scaffolding, and does it comply to safety requirements? In other words, the scaffolding that you're using, doesn't comply to Part 28 of the Workplace Safety and Health Act and Regulation. What hazards are typically found for people on scaffolds? Well, there's electrical contact, so working in close proximity to electrical lines, falling from heights, falling through or between decking, scaffold collapse and entrapment, and then falling materials and or tools. So those can affect both the user and anyone in the general vicinity. So let's have a look at some recent incidents. So in February 2022, a worker was standing on a bracket scaffolding when the scaffold broke and the worker fell 7 feet. In January of this year, scaffolding on a 5-story building collapsed and landed on nearby vehicles. In December 2021, a worker was on a scaffold when the worker slipped and fell between the planks. In November 2021, a worker was on a 4-foot section of scaffold when a board lifted and the worker fell 4 feet into the bottom of a shaft. And today we just got our serious incident report for the month of March, and in March another scaffolding system collapsed. So we've had some pretty significant incidents in the last 6 months, and that kind of is why we're here. What are the responsibilities? So at the end of the day, this is your site, whether you're the subcontractor on site or you're the prime contractor on site. It's your site, and you are responsible as the prime for everything that happens on that site. So are you, as the prime, ensuring that any scaffolding being used on your sites, is it being properly inspected by the sub or by your own people? Subcontractors versus employees. So again, if you are in the prime contractor role, you are responsible for your subs no differently than you would be responsible for one of your employees. And those rules still apply. WCB and the deemed worker, I am going to ask my esteemed colleague, Ihor, to kind of speak to that.
Okay, thanks, Ross. On WCB and the deemed worker. So if you are a builder, you probably have smaller subcontractor crews. It wouldn't be unusual for them to not have their own WCB, especially if you're hiring a one-person subcontractor to paint or do drywall or taping, smaller tasks like that. Guaranteed they probably won't have their own WCB. So then they are your deemed worker. So that means if something happens to them, wage loss benefits, healthcare costs, they go to your WCB account. So that would probably implore you to really watch them carefully and make sure that they are complying with safety rules on site, and do they have all the equipment that they need to do things safely. What's in your subcontractor agreement, you can address a lot of that stuff in your subcontractor agreement, not just a safety orientation kind of thing, but what equipment do you require them to bring to the site? Well, are you requiring them to bring their own baker scaffolding or benches, extension planks, etc.? Make sure you get something like that into your subcontractor agreement. Thank you.
Yeah, and the more detailed your subcontractor agreement is in the prime contractor role, the better. The more detail you can put into that, who's responsible for what documentation, so on and so forth. So yeah, your subcontractor agreement is a very simple document, but I always advise that you should add to that any of your requirements as the prime, because remember, at the end of the day, it's your site. How does workplace safety and health view scaffolding in general? Well, there's been quite a number of stop work orders in the last 6 months surrounding scaffolding. So again, high profile, particularly in the residential sector. You have people up on the roof shingling without fall protection. Everybody in the neighborhood can see it. Same applies when you are using scaffolding on your sites. It's highly visible, and you want to make sure that the rules are being followed, because workplace safety and health officers will issue stop work warnings and stop work orders. It's my understanding it's not very often they would issue an improvement order surrounding scaffolding. It's either a stop work warning or a stop work order. Very, very few improvement orders get issued. What does the legislation say? So 28.2 subparagraph 1, when a scaffold or an elevated work platform is required to be provided at a workplace, the employer must A, develop and implement safer procedures for using the scaffold or elevated work platform provided. So you have to have a procedure on setting that scaffold up, working on that scaffold, getting material up onto that scaffold, and dismantling that scaffold. So you need a procedure for each of those evolutions. And of course, the employer is required to train workers who work on scaffolds and elevated platforms in those safe work procedures, and also ensure that the workers comply with those safe work procedures. So this is kind of where around C, your disciplinary systems will potentially come into play. And what I mean by that, if you're a prime contractor and you notice on your sites that workers, subcontractors, or your own staff are not following safe work procedures, you need to initiate your disciplinary system. Don't hesitate. That's why it's there. It's not a matter of beating people over the head. It is a matter of ensuring that they comply with the safer procedures that have been provided to them when working on or around scaffolding, which is termed critical paths. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to further on that, Ross, if they're not complying, then you got to also figure out, why aren't you complying? Like, is it, do you not care? Has someone not trained you on this? Or the other one is, I don't have the equipment. So again, going back to that subcontractor agreement and what you might have in the CCAN in the back of your yard. Hey, can we get this over here quickly so the entire show complies with this? That would be the way to go. You have to ask, why isn't compliance happening as well? Not just beat them with a stick.
Absolutely. So general use. So again, we're in the legislation a little bit. So 28.6, paragraph 1, an employer must ensure that a scaffold, A, can safely support, and its footing, sills, and similar supports can support without undue settlement or deformation at least 4 times the maximum load that will be or is likely to be imposed on that scaffolding system. So one of the things that you need to be particularly aware of, especially with exterior scaffold systems in the residential sector, is oftentimes backfilling may have occurred 2 or 3 days, weeks, or maybe even a month before that scaffolding is set up. So you have to make sure you are checking the ground conditions of where you are planning on putting that scaffold up, that it can, in fact, take that system. D is equipped with a ladder, stair, runway, or ramp that provides a worker with a safe means of access to and egress from the scaffold system. And 2, tow boards on the open sides of the scaffold platform where there is a risk of tools, materials, equipment, and debris falling from the platform or a worker slipping off the platform. And E has all openings, including stairway openings, appropriately guarded. So there has to be a means of access and egress onto and off of the scaffold that does not, and I repeat, does not require the worker to climb the scaffold itself. I'm sure Ihor will agree. We see this regularly.
Oh, the cross braces are not ladders.
And yeah, exactly. You do not use the scaffold cross braces or ends as your access egress unless it is part of the design of the scaffold. So stay away from the braces. Some scaffolds will come with manufactured ladders attached to the scaffold. And of course, if it's manufactured, then you are free to use it, but you need to be very careful about access egress. So there's different types of scaffold, types that must be designed by an engineer. So we'll find this again in legislation 28.4, paragraph 1. Despite any other provision of this part, an employer must ensure that the following scaffolds are designed by a professional engineer. An open access scaffold of more than 10 meters in height, or B, an enclosed or hoarded access scaffold more than 7.5 meters in height. And we see both types, not terribly often, but we do see them in residential construction. Typically, we'll find those on the larger condo projects. So now what? Always, always, always hazard assessment. When you're using scaffolding, you are working at heights. Critical task: identify, communicate, control the hazards. So again, fall protection. What is the load rating of the plank? Can you put the load you intend onto that planking system? Don't forget, you're not only taking into account the worker, but the material, tools, and equipment. You've got to add it all together, and that will give you an idea of what you can put onto that planking system. What is the load rating of the ladder? The stability of the system itself, and also the stability of the ground, as I mentioned, or the floor, depending on where you're setting your scaffolding up. But you should always begin with your hazard assessment. What are the known and potential hazards we are going to be facing using this particular scaffolding system? Because they're all a little bit different. So hoarding. Some scaffolds are covered, hoarding, with tarps or other materials to enclose them against weather or to contain dust from operations like sandblasting. Scaffolds greater than 7.5 meter in height must be designed by a professional engineer. Wind speeds, structure shapes, and other variables can affect the design and erection of a covered scaffolding greater than 7.5 meters or 25 feet in height. Where scaffolding is completely covered, adequate ventilation must be provided to ensure worker protection when heating, sandblasting, or other procedures expose the worker to hazardous material. Okay, so that's a scaffold at 25 feet. We'll often see scaffolding in the residential sector that is under 25 feet, but fully hoarded for heating late into the fall or into the spring. In both cases, you need to be really, really aware and cognizant of the wind loads that are going to be put onto that scaffolding system once you hoard it in. And I can't understate this. That wind can literally pick up a scaffold system and take it down the road, no different than when we have high winds and we see the stuff flying out of people's backyards. So if you are going to be using hoarding on any of your scaffold systems, you really, really need to be paying attention and make sure all of your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted, just to maintain the integrity of that scaffolding system when there is no one present. So the most common types of scaffold used in residential construction. So we're going to go over a few that the most common types that we see out in the field during our audits, site assessment, so on and so forth. So lean-to scaffold, very common. A lot of the stucco guys use these simply because they're quick, they're easy to set up, and they're not terribly expensive. So a lean-to scaffold is a supported scaffold kept erect by tilting it towards and resting it against a building or structure. It must not be higher than 5 meters or 16.4 feet above grade, and ensure proper guarding is used on this scaffolding system. The ladder jack scaffold consists of a work platform mounted on jacks that bear on both side rails, and the ladder runs 2 extension ladders. The ladders must not be spaced more than 2.5 meters or 8.2 feet apart. They must not exceed a height of more than 5 meters or 16.4 feet above grade, and a fall protection system is required for working at heights of more than 3 meters or 10 feet. And I cannot understate that. If you're at 10 feet, 3 meters, you need fall protection. And that's just that. Does scaffolding qualify as fall protection? Yes, it does, provided it is properly set up and properly guarded. If it's not, if there's any guarding missing of any kind during work or during setup or tear down, then workers need to be tied off. In the case of ladder jack scaffolding, 2 workers maximum on the scaffold at any one time. And also, you need to be taken into account what kind of decking you're using on a ladder jack scaffold once you put 2 workers up there and their material or equipment.
Yeah, can I just add to that, Ross?
Absolutely.
So we say about 2 workers max on a ladder jack scaffold. You're using a ladder, right? As half of the component, half of the support. Typically, they'll have a 300-pound load limit, right? So now I've got maximum 600 pounds that I can put up in the air. So that could be 2 workers and maybe a sheet of board or something. So it adds up quite quickly.
Absolutely. So you need to be very aware of what your weight loads are. Bracket scaffolds have their brackets hung from supporting structures such as the top plate of the wall. The work platform consists of planks with vertical guardrail or supports. Can be used on the exterior or interior of the house. Just ensure that your open ends are guarded. This type of scaffolding is, at least in my humble opinion, is the way to go when you are bringing your rafters in. And you don't have anybody walking around on the top plate. And they're easy to set up. They're not super expensive, and they're extremely versatile. And you can move them around your site very quickly. There's not a lot of setup or tear down.
No, these are first class.
They're quick, easy, simple to use. Mobile scaffolds, on the other hand. So for a mobile scaffold, an employer must ensure that A, it is stable. B, if its height is more than 3 times its least lateral dimension measured at the base, it is equipped with outriggers, stabilizers, or other necessary means to prevent it from overturning. And again, ensure all guards are in place and ensure your wheels or casters are not damaged and locking mechanisms function. I see this quite regularly where wheels or casters are damaged in some fashion. Maybe they're flat spotted on one side because the brakes were functioning and no longer are. So you need to be doing regular checks when you're using mobile scaffolds to ensure that the wheels or casters, there's no damage to them, and your brakes or locking mechanisms function. Super important. Fold up frame scaffolds. So often we'll see electricians, painters, suspended ceiling workers, and other tradespeople will often use fold up scaffolds. The widths range from 330 millimeters or 13 inches to the standard width of about 1.5 meters or 5 feet. It must also have a fully decked work platform and casters with brakes, and it should be used on a smooth, hard surface only. When you are moving these things around, whether it's a baker scaffold, if it's got wheels on it, nobody should be on that thing surfing while it's being moved. They should come down off of the scaffolding, move the scaffolding into its new position.
Okay, can I speak?
Brakes are
Here we
locked.
go.
Absolutely.
Now lock the damn wheels, people.
Start locking the
It's,
wheels.
it's right here, part 20, it's 28.2, three bits of that. You've got to either, no, it's not either, it's and. It's got to be surface, it's got to be firm surface. If you are having a worker on it, they have to be protected independently of the scaffold. So it means tying off to something overhead or something else. And then the worker's got to stay within the confines. They can't just hang off like Tarzan as Buddy shoots them across the floor. So quite frequently we'll go into a house and someone's on their little mini baker or a baker scootering, or as Ross said, surfing this thing around the room. That's a no-go. In my own experience, I've had 2 shoulder surgery events from that, plus one guy totally flying off and breaking ribs. So surfing is a non-starter for me. You're not even getting your trying to speak your way out of that one.
No. It is.
And we had a stop work order on that 10 years ago. So there.
It is something that we see regularly through audits, site assessments, so on and so forth. And it is not a good idea to have someone in that thing while it's being moved. You're just asking for trouble.
Did I express enough rage?
I think
that one?
yeah,
Good.
I think so. I think it was
That
sufficient.
just drives me nuts.
Scaffold foundation and supports. Okay, so scaffolds installed on any type of soil or gravel must be supported by a mud sill plate. To support scaffolds, the ground must be well compacted and level. And again, we see this, I've seen this several times where it is not properly supported. It's not level. It's not, the sills aren't 2x10s. I've seen sills, 2 2x4s sitting side by side. No, use the proper sills. And another thing, the mud sills must be continuous under at least 2 consecutive end frames or supports. And again, you want to make sure that the scaffolding that you are planning on using, or your subs are using, or your employees are using, that the foundation of that scaffold is properly done. No different than the foundation of any of the houses that you build. The foundation for the scaffolding that is going to be used is super important, and lives are at stake, literally, with improper foundations. The scaffold that I mentioned in the incident that collapsed, we don't get all the details. We know that parked cars were damaged by the scaffold collapsing, but we don't know if any people were involved in that. I would certainly hope not. Loads on scaffolds. This is big. Again, see this regularly. Overloading may affect the stability as well as load carrying capacity. Differential settlement is often a problem where heavy loads are applied to scaffolds resting on loose or porous ground. So again, you've got to make sure your foundation is good and solid, because as you start putting load onto that scaffold system, you don't want it sinking. Heavy load should be placed symmetrically on the platform to ensure that soil settlement is uniform. So don't overload your scaffolds on the ends or in the middle. You need to move and spread your load out across the scaffold system. So wood planks, stack the loads over the frame structures. Okay, so if you're using, you know, the typical homemade wood planks, make sure you're following the directions in part 28 for using wood planks. But if you're going to put material up onto them, whether it's bricks or mud or whatever it is, make sure you're stacking your loads over the frame structures, not in between them. Because when you put them in between them, that's when you can start running into problems, as we can see. So top one, stable. As more weight is added to it, it starts to bow. A load going straight down will break and or shorten the plank. And then a new pair of forces is created, pushing things apart. So you'll see in the pictures how A, B, and C, as more weight is added, the plank is shortened over its support. Just the same as in the second picture, where we have a load of bricks sitting in the middle of two sections with no support really underneath it, is shortening that plank.
Okay, well, I'll pick it up from there. So
Yeah.
Thanks, Ross.
Yeah.
So if we saw the previous slide, and you know, if it all comes down to what equipment are people bringing to the site themselves. Is it a junky, not industrial rated ladder or a pretty light plank, or they just grab a 2x12 out of the garage and sling it into something, then I think you might end up having some problems. So thanks. So gear that you would typically have in your yard, you might be providing to your subcontractors, the 5x5 frames. Now these ones will have a ladder built into the end of the frame itself. So that's your way of getting up. Likewise, Baker scaffolds will have the same thing. We talked about ladders with ladder jacks. Again, what's the weight capacity of that? You will also have available or may lend out benches, also known as trestle ladders. So they're actually a ladder. It's not a bench. It falls under a CSA standard of ladder. So again, what's the weight capacity of that? Usually no greater than 300 pounds. The extension planks, these are amazing tools, but again, the weight capacity is quite a bit less than what a bench or a ladder would be. These things sag under loads the same way that the decks were sagging in the previous few slides. You have different lengths available, but you also have 0, 0, 0 ability to put a guardrail on these things. So what you as a prime contractor don't want to see is an extension plank going from some mezzanine floor out to a 5x5 tower that's 12 feet high in the air, and it's a 5 or 6 foot walk across to this thing. You don't want to see that. That should be a flag, and get that thing down and come up with a different way of getting up there. That's a real no-go. Here is the typical Baker scaffold that painters, drywallers, electricians, everyone needs easy access up into a high area. You probably have a fleet of these on your trucks, or your subcontractors do as well. This one is set up absolutely perfectly by the book. It goes way up in the air. It exceeds the 3-to-1 ratio that Ross was talking about in terms of height versus the narrowest width. So if you see at the bottom of the photo, you've got Casper outriggers on. Those wheels also lock, so this thing won't take off on the individual. Guardrails are up at the top rail, mid rail, and you can zoom in somehow. There's also a toe boards around to keep stuff from getting knocked off onto people on the ground. What you don't see very clearly in this photo is at the end frames to the left and right of the worker. You're going, hey, where the heck is the mid rail at the ends? Well, there actually is. I think you can sort of see it on the far right, sort of a sagging chain that acts as the mid rail. 5x5 frames. These you'll see a lot inside homes, especially tall areas. This one's built perfectly with wheels. If it gets to be a heavier load, you could add a diagonal brace at the base of it to keep it from corkscrewing around, twisting like a DNA molecule. But here we've got guardrails in place. It's decked out completely. Cross braces are all in place. And when someone will say, well, I just need one cross brace on one side. They say, no, you got to have them all. Why? Because the thing will fold on you like a wet cardboard box. I have seen it happen once, only once. And I thought I'd never see it. By golly, it does happen. Look at that. At the bottom of the slide, there is the cute little screw jack that you can use to really customize the height of this scaffold. So you knock off the caster wheels, put the screw jacks in, and you can go anywhere from adding 8 inches to a foot. So you can really tweak the height of this thing. If you have to, you can even put screw jacks in between the scaffold frames themselves with the right device. They're really cool.
Can I just jump in here for a sec? When it comes to what Ihor was just talking about, do not co-mingle parts. You can't use different scaffolding parts from different manufacturers and expect the scaffolding to be proper. So, you know, for your braces, your screw jacks, if it didn't come with that piece of equipment, you want to make sure that what you are using is compatible to that particular scaffold system. Sorry.
No, that's a good point. We will typically deliver 2 or 3 towers of 5x5 frames to a bigger house, but we have to make sure we have to work hard with our delivery workers or truck drivers that they know that this part fits with that one. So it takes a little bit of an orientation in the yard to let people know that this frame works with this one, not a chance, because we'll have a mishmash of parts showing, and now the workers try to put this thing together and go, well, what the heck am I supposed to do with this? Nothing fits. And then it's like 3 days lost trying to find parts. Now on the planks, the regs speak to wood planks, and they say a plank's got to be SPF #1 grade lumber or better. Yeah, try finding that now. So you're probably really restricted to using a manufactured 5, 7, or 10-foot deck. Or you get into the stucco exterior decks, which can run, these are amazing. They can run it, you know, way beyond 16 feet. I think I've seen some 20-footers, but they are a real bear to move around sites, let alone there's no hope in heck you're going to get it into a house. It's been tempting, but you're just not going to fit it into a door and around a stairway. But wood planks, try not to use those. I think I've got it notes that my picture here, this came from an incident. Someone tried to use a 2x12 and they right away fell right through it. Thank goodness they're only 3 feet off the ground. So I show up at the house. Well, what were you doing, Al? Well, this is what I used. So I found this in the garage. Bad idea. Here, we'll get you another deck. Okay, give me half an hour. I'll get you one. If we don't have a manufactured frame scaffold and you've got a really fascinating area to guard or get access to in a house, just build something. There are going to be some phone calls made, but really get on it, because this is the only way to safely get into an area. You're always trying to, you know, jerry rig something, and it just doesn't work. So just build something. If you need help, call your office. Develop a safe work procedure. When an event happens, workplace safety and health is going to ask, was there a procedure in place for this? And by golly, I hope you got one. And that's what your safety coordinator is for anyway. Fall protection is always going to be the #1 consideration. So in terms of building something, we have had great success with using site materials, even stuff that isn't quite on site, but you find it. And you find a competent person who has some kind of an imagination, and they can build something that will comply. Sound materials. So here we had one event where we had to go up into a really sketchy stairway. And it was for this situation we were taping. We couldn't set up a scaffold frame in the stair itself because of the dimensions, but we could plank off to something else and fixed to the wall. So this is an example there. Also Baker scaffolds, we've talked about they're very handy. Everyone's got to have Baker scaffolds. So the procedure here was we got to work in a stairway, but it's one of these crazy switchback things and not wide enough to accommodate the frame. So we just built an extra stair and that complied. And it was secure. But look here, we have the wheels taken off. So we don't have to even worry about shaky Baker wheels or brakes working. One thing that is always going through my mind, and one of the few things I've used that I learned in school, Isaac Newton's third law of motion. So for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Don't ask me what number 1 and 2 are. So in this case, if you push against the wall will push back. This was a pretty gruesome event to reflect, talk about Newton's third law of motion. If you push a tool onto the wall, it will push back. These were my notes upon arriving at a pretty catastrophic wreck. And it was a bad hypothesis. So worker was on a Baker scaffold, ladder up onto the Baker scaffold, and an extension plank running from across. You can see that over the red. Now, one of the regulations is thou shalt not put benches or ladders on top of a scaffold. So first violation here, put a ladder on a scaffold. Number 2, there was no fall protection consideration. This did result in a stop work order and several painful surgeries for an individual. So stairways, you will probably see this on sites where a painter or a taper will have a ladder up in a stairway and an extension plank going out to it set up on a bench. Only problem, might say, hey, good idea, very effective, quick. But when you start pushing laterally on the thing, it's going to rack on you. And so here, the fix is build something. That worker will be having to access that site for upwards of 5 or 6 days, plus other trades. You might have a plumber that has to do some work in there, an electrician in there. So this floor that was part of the corrective action for the stop work order, this thing took all of maybe 25, 30 minutes to install and gave perfectly protected access to this area. Fall protection was not an issue at this point. Ergonomically, they just said, oh, well, how high do you want it? Okay, we'll bang it in here. So any overhead work and MSI issues were taken care of. So this all could have come out in the hazard assessment. If the injured worker said, hey, I got crazy working at heights, this is an A hazard, and if I got that information right away, I would have been able to address it. But no hazard assessment was really done at all for this. And we learned about it when I got the call that, hey, so-and-so is down, get here right away. I called the ambulance. And if this hierarchy of controls was set into place, we would have had no hurt. So scaffolding isn't just about getting the work done. It's about people just not getting wrecked and destroyed. Yeah. Ross?
Yes. At the end of the day, when working on scaffolding, like Ihor just mentioned, fall protection is your first consideration, always. There's been too many people falling off of or through scaffolding in the last 6 months or a year, and there's no good reason for it. It's awful. Nobody wants to go through a serious incident on your site. So you need to be taking the time to make sure that you are regularly assessing the hazards. Okay, what hazards are we facing? What are our controls? And one of the controls that will often be used is some kind of a scaffolding system, and that's fine. However, if you're going to be using scaffolding systems, you need to make sure that you are still protecting that worker from falls. Just because you're on a scaffold doesn't mean you can't fall, doesn't mean you can't collapse.
People will find a way. Yeah.
They will find a way, and as stupid as that sounds, believe me, they will. So you've got to make sure you're assessing those hazards, you're bringing in those controls, you're communicating them, but as it says on the slide, your due diligence is a requirement under the Workplace Safety and Health Act and regulation. It's your only defense if any charges were to be laid against an individual or a company. There is no other defense. Due diligence is your only defense, and due diligence is those hazard assessments, those safe work practices and procedures for working on, around, building, dismantling your scaffolds.
Training.
Your training. What kind of training? Fall protection training, training to build a scaffold, training to dismantle the scaffold. Your near misses, your investigations, all of that is going to form your due diligence. So you've got to make sure you're staying on top of it, because if you don't, and an incident does occur, like Ihor mentioned, when workplace safety and health officers become involved in an investigation, particularly where there is a collapse or an incident surrounding scaffolds, more than likely they're going to get involved. And what are the first things they're going to ask for when they arrive on site? Well, one of the first things they're going to ask for is, where's your hazard assessment? And as Ihor mentioned earlier, where's your safe work procedure for this job? So you've got to make sure you've got them on site, and that workers are regularly reviewing those procedures. Reviewing the procedure once over the course of a year is not adequate. A procedure for working off a scaffold should be reviewed at, I would say, at minimum 3 to 4 times a year, minimum.
Now, we would do that as a form of a toolbox talk. Okay,
Yeah.
Today, this week's toolbox talk is scaffold practices and procedures.
Yep, that's all you need
It's
to
easy to do.
do. And as soon as, you know, part of your due diligence, that toolbox talk can form part of your due diligence defense, because when the worker signs that document, what does that signature say? We know and understand.
You hope.
You hope.
Now, if I could speak on training.
Absolutely.
You mentioned training for scaffold stuff. In Manitoba, there really is no regulation for certifying a scaffold training thing.
Competent.
There's, yeah, so if you saw in the slides, there was choose a competent person. So as a company or prime contractor, you could designate a competent person in your company that would be quasi in charge of your scaffold fleet and responsible for issuing or putting things up or down. Typically a subcontractor boarding crew or a taping crew would be called, there's going to be somebody in that crew that will be a competent person. And you hope that they followed the procedures and have looked at your practices and procedures and have conducted a toolbox talk on that. When you see large commercial builds, like tube and clamp stuff that we typically won't see in residential construction, the person's putting that stuff up have a 4-year carpenter ticket specifically towards scaffold erection and dismantling. That's a whole other game. We usually don't see that at all in residential construction unless we have some really impressive build going on that we have to hire a third party to put up tube and clamp.
Like high rise.
Yeah, or North Star, any of the larger firms. And they will have easy access to an engineer's stamp if things really get crazy, like above the 30-meter hoarding and complicated events like that. But for us as home builders, we'll probably have to find the competent person within the company and make sure that they know what's going on with scaffolding, are aware of the rules and regulations, and are able to maintain the equipment that you have. And also probably teach the new people how to put the stuff up, because everyone should be working themselves out of a job somewhere along the line.
And I would add that if you're a prime contractor and you don't necessarily have any of your own staff on site, driving nails or drilling or doing whatever, you're subbing everything out, then as the prime, you need to have someone on your own staff who, when they are out in the field, so your supervisor, your project managers, when they see scaffolding, they understand what they're looking at. So that they can, as the representative of the prime who's visiting that site for various reasons, when they do arrive on site and there is scaffolding set up, you want to make sure that your supervisors, your project managers, at least understand the basics of, yes, that scaffolding appears to be set up and is being used properly versus one that is obviously not.
Yeah. First flag would be, where are your guardrails?
Yeah. If you see a scaffolding without toe boards and guardrails, you got to start digging a little bit deeper, because chances are you're going to find more issues.
Oh, for sure.
It's the old, one leads to the other. We have contact information up here for you folks. If you'd like to contact myself, you can reach out to me at my personal email anytime, or you can also drop a line into the general inbox at CSAM. I threw Ihor's, unbeknownst to him,
Sure, throw it in.
his contact info up on.
No, I have no trade secrets on this.
Yeah, absolutely. There is no secrets here. Everything is shared. If I've got it and you need it, let me know and I'll give it to you happily. I'm not one of these safety people that it's mine and you can't have it. That drives me nuts.
Yeah.
So I guess we have some chat.
We do.
Okay.
So the first one, at what heights are stairs required?
At what heights are access stairs?
Oh, that's a good one.
So
It's actually lower than you think. If you're going, I think it's over 3 sections high after that, then you have to have some means of accessing from inside.
yeah.
There is a number on that. Ross has got the pages flipping furiously right now. It is in the book.
So if you want to carry on with the next question while I'm looking this one up, Lanny, I will get back.
Sure. So the next question, have you witnessed many residential stucco crew scaffolds that meet all the safety requirements?
Yes, I have. And it's really neat to see that. Yeah. Some, yeah, of course, there's some that kind of suck, but, and you just go, oh, brother. But last summer was actually pretty good for seeing guardrails up on stucco crews. That was really neat to see. And the challenge with stucco is the one that I always see is, how are you getting all that heavy stuff up there? So they have their genie wheels and they pull stuff up that way. But again, ergonomics is a big issue, and making sure that you've got a heavy guy on a rope down below. It's again, just a physics thing. Don't put the skinny lightweight guy on the rope hauling gear up to the top. It's a very bad elevator experiment.
Okay, to answer your question, your earlier question, if a scaffold is more than 6 meters in height, it is equipped with a suitable hoisting device for hoisting materials. We were just talking about that. If a scaffold is 9 or more meters in height, it is equipped with an internal stairway or ladders. And if any ladder under subclause 1 exceeds 3 meters in height, the ladder is equipped with fall protection attachments.
Yeah, so if it's 3 5x5 sections, greater than 3 5x5 sections, then we're looking at running some ladders inside. And those,
stairs.
Yeah, a stairway, those drop. You can rent them. Those are neat to have in your own fleet as well. They're a real bugger to move around because they're like 3 times the weight of a conventional 10-foot deck, but they're damn handy.
Okay, those are the 2 questions we've got so far. We'll just maybe wait one more minute to see if there's any last minute questions.
Absolutely.
But while we do that, I just want to thank you, Ihor and Ross, for sharing your insight with us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. I'll just maybe do one last little check, see if there's any. Doesn't look like there's any questions coming in. So thank you all for attending this afternoon's session. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Safety is everybody's business, and it's a key piece of what we do at the MHBA, what our members do to make sure everybody gets home safe at the end of the day. And thank you to CSAM for hosting today's session. We look forward to hosting our next one, which is coming up on May 31st. And at that one, PHBI's Paul Betts will be providing us with a marketing presentation focusing on knowing and owning your own personal brand as a sales tool. So our next May session has a bit more of a marketing focus, but we're also working on additional technical sessions for the fall. So please watch for the details on future virtual sessions in the coming weeks over the next few months. So we look forward to seeing you May 31st. And until then, stay safe, everybody. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you, Lanny.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Thank you.